Mary White, one of the co-chairs of WEED, and I'm joined by WEED Vice Chair Sharon Siskin and Secretary Christina Bertia. Women Eco Art Dialogue, WEED, was started 25 years ago as a volunteer-run collective of women-identified visual artists, writers, curators, art historians, researchers, scientists, and others interested in the intersection of art and ecological and social justice issues. Thank you for coming to this very special event to honor and celebrate artist activist Sally Hindman and Youth Spirit Artworks, who does amazing work. This is part of our Art and Activism series, which we have every month. So we'll start with a land acknowledgement. And as I mentioned before, please add your location and land acknowledgement in the chat if you wish. WEED's office sits on the territory of the Wichen, the ancestral and unceded land of the Shoshone-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County, near one of the largest shell mounds in the Bay Area. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familiar descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, who are campaigning to become federally recognized, the Association of Ramushtoush Ohlone, who are researching, revitalizing, and preserving Ramushtoush Ohlone history and culture, and the Confederated Village of Lezon and Sogorote Land Trust, who are working to return native land back to Indigenous stewardship. Let's do a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. We are recording this event, and please keep your audio muted during the presentation. The host may mute you if there's extra noise. Sally's presentation will go till approximately 6 p.m., a little bit before. And after Sally finishes speaking, we'll stop the first recording and start the second recording for questions and answers that'll go till 6:30. If you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat so that we can refer to them later. The WEED's vision is to continue another decade as our global network of women activist artists grows. And we are fundraising to rebuild our 2012 website with a new artist directory and membership interaction. So please give generously to support this vision at the WEED website. We'll put the WEED website in the chat. So now I'm very happy to introduce Sally. Sally is a very, very special artist activist in the Bay Area. She's been involved with interfaith social justice ministry, working with homeless and other marginalized youth and adults for at least 25 years and more. She's committed to working in solidarity with those on the margins, empowering people to make their voices heard towards systematic change. She believes strongly in the power of art to serve as a vehicle for personal healing and transformation, as well as a tool for teaching people about their gifts and strengths as they grow and develop vocationally. We welcome Sally and look forward to hearing about her path as she became an artist and an activist with a strong belief in faith-based art for social change. So Sally, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mary. And thanks everybody who could be here. This is really a pleasure to be able to share and be a part of the reflection and action being taken by WEED, and just such a pleasure to be able to share with you all. And I just want to start out just with a few sort of caveats as a preface in my sharing. And first of all, as Mary was describing, I'm a longtime Quaker. I've been involved in Quaker practice for 40-some years now, and I consider myself a Christian atheist, and I also consider myself somebody very active in the Jewish community. Our family is Jewish. We belong to a Reform synagogue here in the East Bay, and are active and practicing, and we're raising our daughter Jewish. So anyway, I've been involved in interfaith ministry with homeless people for, you know, 34 years. And that's where I'm coming from, just as background. And also, I just want to give a little bit of a background preface that, you know, I grew up in the 60s in Chicago. I'm from the Chicago suburbs. I came from a privileged background. And that has, you know, shaped my worldview. I'm somebody that is really dealing with a lot of issues, you know, around privilege and you know, dealing with entitlement. And so, you know, I'm working on my white fragility, and I just try every day to, you know, acknowledge the mistakes that I make and keep going and work with, you know, as an ally, as a committed, trustworthy ally. But anyway, that I want to start out just, you know, saying that. And so just to start off, we're going to show a really wonderful slideshow about the Youth Spirit Artworks Tiny House Village. And we're going to do that in a minute. We're going to start that in a few minutes. But I'm just going to say a little bit about my journey that sort of ended up with my working for this organization, Youth Spirit Artworks, and a little bit about that. And then we'll go into the slides about the Tiny House Empowerment Village. Does that sound okay? Yep. Guys, ready for that? Okay, great. So, you know, just to start out, I came up with, you know, in college and so forth during the energy conservation movement and the environmental movement. I was a natural resources major in college, and I moved to Washington, D.C. right after college to work for Ralph Nader and to be involved in the Nader network. And, you know, there were a lot of white privileged people doing that work. And that it was a really shaping influence for me. And at that time, I was super involved in the Quaker meeting and being part of Friends Meeting of Washington, a really active congregation there. And that had a really big influence on me spiritually and how I thought about the world, my commitment to justice and to simplicity and to peacemaking. But being involved with Quakers has just had a huge impact on my life. And it's really a pleasure to have some people from our Quaker meeting here in Berkeley at this sharing. So I have been involved in, you know, painting with gouache from a class I took in college. So I was painting, you know, darling little pictures of my friends with gouache paint, and wasn't a really particularly serious artist. But I ended up, at the time, I loved William Johnson and Jacob Lawrence and Faith Ringgold and, you know, a lot of the amazing African-American artists that were super strong on design and color that just, you know, were just always just amazing to me. But also, you know, Matisse and Willard and folks like that, just the way color could be combined with design and just be so amazing. And while I was working in the Nader movement, we started this organizing around pesticide right to know laws. And we were trying to work on a pesticide right to know bill in the county. And one of the things I was struck by is that the Nader people were they had an ethics to them. It was like a secular ethics. And to me, it was kind of missing something in terms of the way spirituality was expressed and integrated into what they did. They were sort of denying, it felt to me like they were denying kind of spirituality and how it impacted their activism. It was like secular ethics in a way. And to me, that just didn't really sort of do it for me. I was coming from a different place as a Quaker and somebody committed to Quaker practice. And so we had this work that we were doing with this pesticide right to know law. And we ended up taking posters that were depictions of sick people from pesticides. And this was young people from University of Maryland. At that time, I was director of the state Nader group called Maryland Perk. And so we took all these posters of primitive, kind of naive art posters of people getting sick from pesticides. And we put them on all the seats of people in the county council meeting. And all of a sudden, the posters took over this county council meeting where we weren't thinking we were going to win this pesticide right to know thing. And the TV cameras, when they came in, they all landed right on these posters of these funny characters that we had put up with their tongues hanging out and all this. And basically, we passed this county right to know act because we made posters that we put on all the chairs that just blew everybody away and just disrupted this county council meeting about this pesticide right to know thing. My whole, I don't want to say my whole vocation, but my whole vocation at that point, everything turned upside down. And my questions about working in secular activism, I just decided I was going to study social change art, and that if we were going to do anything, we were going to use art, and we were going to do organizing using art, and we were going to involve people doing that art. We were just going to raise hell, and art was so much more fun than all this really serious, horrible stuff. People, I don't know. It's just the work that the Nader movement was doing did not speak to my heart in a way, and art did. Art for social justice really, really did. So I started going to art school and got involved in a lot of spiritually focused art making, and things changed a lot. But just to summarize that, I ended up making a decision, first of all, that my path was really about Quaker ministry, and that was what I cared about. I wanted to be involved with Quakers. I wanted to be involved in Quaker work for justice. And I felt called to work with people from the margins, people from the community using art. And so I ended up going to seminary at Pacific School of Religion, and then California College of Arts and Crafts at the time, simultaneously to do an MDiv, a Master's of Divinity, and then a BFA in social change art, focused on social change art, and particularly focused on performance art. And so I ended up doing an MA in theology and art, focusing on, in addition to the MDiv, focused on liberation art and how art could be related to liberation theology, and then this performance art degree. So that was really, I studied liberation theology, if you guys are at all familiar with that, and the way that sacred texts could be used to organize people at the grassroots level to create justice, and just all about how people that are underserved can be engaged in creating justice through art. So that's really what I've been impassioned about for a lot of years and really excited about. I was working after seminary as director of the chaplaincy of the homeless in Berkeley, and we were able to do a lot of art there. And then I had the just incredible privilege to go to New Orleans and interact with this group in New Orleans called Yaya, that was engaging youth from the community in doing amazing, very design and color focused art there. And so ultimately, stories, whatever, just to shorten things, I ended up involved in working to found this organization called Youth Spirit Artworks, which is a jobs training and interfaith jobs training program that works with homeless and other underserved young people using art as a vehicle for creating justice. So our organization, Youth Spirit Artworks, is now 15 years old, and we published Street Spirit, the homeless newspaper, which I was involved in co-founding in 1995. And our whole organization, everything that we do is really about making the voices of people, underserved people, heard. And so community organizing is one of our vocational pathways, and is a key aspect of our program that we involve all of our youth in, all the youth in our program. We work with about 150 unsheltered and other underserved young people each year, and we train youth for living wage jobs in 7 areas. So back in 2016, we had created a day shelter, and we were working with young people from the shelter who were getting put out on the street at 8 a.m. and the shelter wasn't opening again until 8 p.m. And so we ended up getting a little money to be able to be open 70 hours a week during that time. And we started to work with the young people from the shelter to ask them, in terms of the community organizing pathway at Youth Spirit, what kind of a campaign they would like to be involved with. What were the generative themes for them, and what would they like to organize around. And so we started meeting with youth every other Wednesday in the evenings, and having meetings to talk about what youth were passionate about. And this is, by the way, a slide. This first slide is just Youth Spirit Artworks' main studio funky studio in South Berkeley that is actually a very spiritual place and just has been a wonderful home for us for the last 7 years. So maybe we could go to the next slide. Okay, this is a funny one. Okay, maybe go to the next one after that. Go to the next slide. Okay, so this slide is the second meeting. It's actually the second meeting of the shelter youth with activists from the community that wanted to talk about how we could respond to the passions that youth had at the time, and what was it that we were going to do in order to organize for young people. And you can see even in this slide, Betsy Morris from Strawberry Creek Friends Meeting is there, and just some familiar faces that folks may know. It's like Moni Law there, I see. So anyway, these were the meetings that we started to have to talk about what youth wanted to do, and they pretty soon started talking about wanting to build a tiny house and ultimately to create a tiny house village. So maybe go to the next slide. Okay, so we ended up getting together with a pro bono architect and then a wonderful contractor, Dan Edelson, and then Trey Brown, and they worked with youth on I think it's called InDesign. They did a SketchUp, and they started to design what youth wanted in a tiny house. This is actually a picture of our first meeting to talk about, if we made a tiny house, what would it look like, and what did youth want to have in a tiny house. And from that, we went to the next slide. Next slide, where we got money to build a tiny house. So our youth then spent 6 months. We had 6 youth that trained and were taught how to build tiny houses. So maybe go to the next slide. Okay. Yeah, so we just did that, and our youth built a tiny house. Next slide. Let's see what that means. Yeah, another just process of building the tiny house. Next slide. So there's our tiny house, and this is after we finished it. We ended up making this house smaller than we planned. This is a picture with Ben Bartlett and some folks from the community and folks from YSA. But we built a tiny house, and at the time we thought we would just paint it in some plain way because there was someone on our board that thought that it had to look really traditional, and that was very perplexing to us. So that's kind of hard. But in this iteration, we had painted the house kind of this pale yellow, very strange. Okay, next slide. Yeah. So this is us continuing to have meetings, every other week on Wednesday nights. And in fact, in this picture, there's Reginald Gentry, who is even now our interfaith organizer, which is really fun. So basically, youth that were part of this are now like on the staff of Youth Spirit Artworks. Okay, next slide. All right. So our youth going out in the community and giving talks about why the community should want to have a tiny house village. We did presentations to congregations all over the East Bay and started to generate interest. And we ended up by the end having 45 interfaith congregations involved in our project. And so this is, that's Zaire and Jason Wilson talking at the Unitarian Church. And then we had one of our council people, Cheryl Davila, came over and said, "Oh, we've got this site for you. We think we found a site for a tiny house village." And so here we had a business, Omega Salvage wanted to give us land or lease us land. So we had a community meeting in Berkeley, and these are the neighbors. You can see Laura Magnani from the Quaker. I think Rick Herbert's even in the room. But this is the angry neighbor group who came to say, no way are you going to build this, no way are you going to have this tiny house village in our backyards. So next slide. Those are the evil neighbors. Okay, we worked all through this project. We ended up collaborating with the community architecture program at USF, University of San Francisco, with Seth Wachtel and his students. So his students, every time we found a possible site to do the tiny house village, that students would make a master plan. And so at one point he made a master plan for this site in West Berkeley, but every time we found a potential site, Seth and his students would make a master plan for how we could build a tiny house village there. So next slide. This is another really cool rendition of a tiny house village that Seth Wachtel's class came up with. And a lot of the ideas from this particular drawing ended up getting implemented in the actual village that we created. And I just want to say that the community architecture program at USF involved more than 45 students over the course of 4 years in our project, and students learned so much interacting with our youth. But that was an amazing synergistic relationship that where wonderful people, unsheltered youth and underserved housing youth were working with youth from USF in doing this design work together. It was very, very cool. So we spent a lot of time going to different meetings where we would try to make our point about what we were trying to do and why, first in Berkeley, why they should work with us in building this tiny house village. And the religious community just knocked themselves out, rolled up sleeves, and just people were out till all hours of the night with us. The city of Berkeley just tortured us and were just so mean and made us wait till 11:30 at night. You can see on this thing, I think it might have been 11:50. What time is it? Oh, no, that's the stopwatch. But I mean, a lot of these meetings, they made us wait to do our presentations till practically the middle of the night. And there was just an amazing amount of love that poured into trying to support our doing this, even though the city of Berkeley never did come to really provide support. Next slide. Okay. So this is a really great picture of our youth when we were, finally starting to make some traction. They were supporting getting case management money. But this was another late night. We're holding our banner, and I think there were 25 people there that night. Just, really had a lot of stamina. Okay, next slide. So after we built the first tiny house, we started building more tiny houses, and we worked with doing changes to the design and just started using our site over at U Spirit Artworks and building tiny houses. We started building in the spring of, I think it was 2019, and we ended up building as many as 10 houses. But we first built 2 prototypes that were sort of the next houses, and this was one of those. And you can see young people and allies were involved in all that work. Okay, next slide. So this was when we started training build leaders, and we trained like 45 build leaders in leading cohorts to have a larger build where we were going to build 13 houses. We didn't know where we were going to go build. We just knew that we were going to go somewhere and we were going to build 13 houses. So this is Rolf Bell, our just amazingly brilliant, incredibly kind minister, volunteer construction director leading, teaching the build houses. Okay, next slide. Yeah, okay. So finally, we had a lot of low points. We probably wasted 2 years trying to do this project in Berkeley, and then finally we gave up on doing it in Berkeley, and we decided we were going to open up to doing it in either Oakland or Richmond. And the city of Oakland, after our attending about 50 meetings in Oakland, decided that they wanted to give us some land, and they sent us over to Heckenberger Road, 633 Heckenberger Road. And this is us on the first day that we came to look at this site that the city of Oakland was going to give us. And this is like youth from YSA, ally builders that have been trying to build tiny houses, and Seth Wachtel from USF and his students. So anyway, this is us in this freezing cold day looking at this completely blank parking lot that they were going to give us to create this village. Okay, next slide. We started to have meetings. We were having meetings with all these people about how we were going to pull this off. And this is one of the first meetings where we met. I can't tell exactly which one this was, but Oakland decided they were going to have all their heads of planning, heads of departments that were involved. They had never done a tiny house village, but they decided they would pull all their department heads together. So we started having these meetings so Oakland could like figure out how to do this. And so next slide. Okay, this is one of our meetings where we were trying to talk Jesse Araguin into supporting us. This sort of got thrown in. And this is like our youth and some of the allies, adult allies, meeting with the mayor one more time, trying to see if we could get Berkeley to do something. And of course, okay. Next slide. Yeah, this is the first meeting with the department heads of all the main departments in Oakland, where they started saying, okay, we can do this. How are we going to do this? And it was like, talk about like the room where it happened. Like this is just a really interesting meeting where these people are talking about this new idea and how they could do it as Oakland. So I love this picture because it was like, oh, we could do this, we could do this. So it was pretty awesome. Okay, next slide. This is, we had 14 different working groups that worked on this project and different dimensions of the project. Youth were involved in decision making at every single level. So they were involved in large decisions and small decisions. They did everything. And this is just one of our small groups having a meeting about design elements of the tiny house and kind of what we needed to do. And there were just countless meetings like this. Youth come together with staff and people on our steering committee, and we try to figure stuff out. But the youth voices in the decision making were just, youth were leading this project, and it was just awesome. Okay, next slide. All right, we somehow, by the grace of God, were able to find a space to be able to build the first 13 houses. And so this is a picture of our when we started to get building on the 13 houses that we're going to have the build leaders building them. And this is us. We found this space over on Brush Street at that point, and we had these houses to build over on Brush Street. So this is, we had between 200 and 225 volunteers a day when we were doing the builds for this, and just spent a massive amount of time doing this. Okay, next slide. Okay. So we had a color palette, and we started talking about the arts in the village and how art was going to be just integral to everything that we did. And you can see from this slide that we had come up with our color palette by then. And again, youth were involved in all these decisions, but you can see we have trim colors, we have base colors, and it's starting to, even now, even at this point, it's starting to look kind of cool. Okay, next slide. Yeah, this is the blank parking lot that we were given, that we were somehow trying to create a whole tiny house village out of this completely empty parking lot that had no utility hookups or anything else. Next slide. All right, so this is the final rendition from USF and the architects of what this tiny house village might look like, that was designed by students from University of San Francisco with our youth. And you can see that our colors have all, gotten going there. You can see that there's ground murals that they've put in here, that somehow they have this idea we're gonna have ground murals. You can see that our yurts that our youth wanted to have all came through. You can see that there's quads, that there's 4 quads that the village is lined up in. And you can even see in this cool picture that there's kind of an outdoor structure for eating and sharing that's shown up in the picture. So, and there's also tons of planters and plants, so that's kind of cool. But it gives you a sense of like, okay, this is what we're thinking. All right, next slide. All right, so at this point we had these incredible tiny house movers that had kind of come up from the community, that were volunteers driving tiny houses around. At one point in the winter, we had to take all the tiny houses we had built, because our site that we had found we couldn't have after 6 weeks. So we took tiny houses to churches, 5 different churches for the winter. And we started, when we finally signed the lease with the city of Oakland, this 0-cost lease, we started bringing tiny houses back to this space and putting up this village. And we would have build days all day Saturday and Sunday at that point. And but you can see in this picture, the top picture, we've got the yurt, one of the yurts up, and we've got, like, quite a number of tiny houses that have arrived on the scene. And as they were arriving, we were painting murals on them. I'm gonna talk about the murals. Okay, next slide. So yeah, so this is just a picture of people building, and by the time this project was completed, there were 3,500 volunteers. We built all through COVID, and Rick, who's here at this session, was one of the people who said, "Don't build in COVID, that's crazy." But we ended up doing that anyway, and nobody got COVID. Okay, next slide. This is our working on building the wheelchair ramps. So we worked really hard on that with a deep commitment, although money was really tough. And then you can see in this picture, the fence had come up, and I'm going to be talking more about the fence and who painted the fence. So next slide. Yeah, just, I can't say enough, like, all through COVID, we had volunteers working at Use Spirit Artworks, really 24 hours a week. They would work 3 days a week minimum. And so we had just so many dedicated people that, like, during COVID had been laid off from their jobs, and they just gave up everything that they were doing in order to build this village. And it was just one of the most moving things in my life, the way that people just were incredibly generous and rolled up their sleeves to do this thing together. Next slide. Yeah, and there were, like, so many people did different things in the process of this. And this is this little 4-year-old that came and painted our outside planters. And, just that's how it was. There's just so many different people who did cool things. But it really was, it takes a village to build a village. Everybody working together. Next slide. One of the most amusing things about this project was Temple Bethel's Camp Kitov was closed down for the summer, and they didn't know what they were going to do because a third of the congregation's income came from their camp. And we ended up making this deal with working out this agreement with Temple Bethel that they were going to have their camp at our tiny house village all summer. And so they had 250 campers from Camp Kitov taking the fence planks for our fence. And basically, we figured out that we could save $80,000 on the fence if we would build our own fence. So our youth formed this Murals working group, and they decided that there would be prayers and blessings on 500 planks surrounding the village from the interfaith religious community, and we'd have people from the religious community paint prayers and blessings surrounding the village, and then half the village, the planks on the fence, would be youth graffiti murals. So this is the Temple Bethel kids, little, really like 5th graders, etc., painting their prayers and blessings on these incredible planks. And you can see there's like seven houses there. Then the youth from YSA decided they were going to create mural guidelines for murals, and they created guidelines of the kind of art they wanted to have. And then they solicited youth artists to create the murals and to use those themes in creating mural designs. And then they collected mural designs from all these different youth, and then they painted murals on all the tiny houses. So we have 26 tiny houses. They all have at least 2 murals on them, if not, murals on all sides. And this is a 14-year-old, Ava Blue Ganadin, painting her mural. She painted this totally cool mural. Next slide. Yeah, so this is the, and there's different stages of this, but this is the tiny house village when it was, you could say, nearly complete and near the grand opening. And you can see the Coliseum in the background. Our yurts are up. At that point, we had a little fake grass that was up. And we opened the village in February of last year off grid because PG&E hadn't been turned on yet, using solar collectors. So that was kind of amazing. And here you can see the solar collectors in action. But anyway, at that point, we had not painted the ground murals, but this is what the ground was like before we painted the ground. So but you can see that the murals are on the tiny houses and they look really decorative. Next slide. And this is, we ended up having around 20 different companies that donated furnishings for us and did different things to make the village possible. And Williams-Sonoma Inc. Gave us $40,000 in in-kind furniture and furnishings for the village, and they decorated our living room yurt. So this is the living room yurt, looking pretty fantastic. Next slide. Yeah, this is our grand opening. We were still obviously during COVID, and we but we decided we needed to have our grand opening. The youth had moved into the village, at least half of them had, with the solar collectors. So we decided we're getting started. We're going to go ahead and open this village. We had this grand opening, and so many people had been involved in building the village that we found we had like over 200 people that came to this opening. We were telling people not to come, that we wanted them on Zoom, but all these people came anyway. So it was kind of a little overwhelming, but it's fun. Okay, next slide. This is one of our youth leaders. The youth led the grand opening, and they were just so proud and humbled and excited, and it was just amazing to watch them. Just so just proud. Just so proud of what they had accomplished. It was amazing. And then they had this ribbon cutting, which was led by Reverend Alexandra Childs, who's the traveling minister for the Arts for the United Church of Christ. This is our youth doing their ribbon cutting at grand opening. So that was just delightful. Okay, next slide. I think there's one more of them cutting their ribbon. Yes, it's just like their incredible victory. So yeah, that was great. Okay, so next slide. This is the ground mural. We ended up applying for a grant from East Bay Fund for Artists to paint a ground mural covering the whole ground, since that was sort of what the master plan had said we were going to have. And so our youth worked with senior artist Pancho Pescador. 10 youth worked with him, and they painted this, like the largest ground mural in the Bay Area. And it's got all these amazing things on it. And you can see here that it has a pink jaguar, and it has all these birds, and this sort of cosmic picture of the solar system, and this amazing frog. It just has all these cool things. So anyway, this is their rendition, their drawing before they started painting the ground mural. It's 1.5 acres. Next slide. And this is the ground mural from the air. I think we ended up having doing a drone shot, and you can see the pink jaguar there. You can see the frog, all the different dimensions of this as they all, came to fruition. So it looks super cool from the air. Next slide. Okay, this is the sign for the village, which was designed by a youth that was in college, like a freshman in college designed this. And we had a fabricator, an amazing fabricator locally, whose name I'm blanking on. I'm sorry, I should credit him. That fabricated this for us, which was just such a blessing. But again, even the sign, was designed by a youth. So just like everything was designed by the youth. Just super cool. And next slide. Yeah. So yeah, we found that it takes a village to build a village, and all of us just feel so blessed and so proud, that even during COVID and even during Donald Trump's presidency, that the whole community could come together to do this amazing project together that just really reflects our desire for our collective desire for justice and equity for all people. So I just want to say a little bit before we start on questions, more to kind of contextualize this. So, I was talking about my own, the way that performance art influenced my work and the liberation theology. And in a lot of ways, on the one, what I feel really called to is art that really comes from the community, that is a whole group of people working together, and the way that we can weave a quilt together that really expresses all of our dreams and hopes. And I think the thing that's so cool about the way that the Tiny House Village came together is that it really was a collective piece as artwork. All these murals, the ground mural, quilts that were made for each tiny house by people from First Congregational Church of Berkeley, that all matched the curtains that were made by local people from the religious community that wanted to make curtains. And then congregations adopted tiny houses. So, you know, the Quakers, the Catholics, you know, even the Muslim community has been super involved, the Buddhist community has been super involved. And so just everybody had a role. Like, so many people brought their own gifts to the project and donated them with kind of all their heart and all their spirit. And it was something that, on the one hand, like, no one person could have done this. It was like this kind of this group art piece that just everybody's creativity and everybody's gifts came together, and we created this together. So I just think that you know, is such a it's like a group performance in many ways, and that's what we feel so excited about. So I think we can open it up for questions. We're a little early.
Mary, do you want to say something? And should I just turn off the recording? You're on mute.
All right, well, let's give a big hand wave to Sally and thank her. Wonderful, wonderful. So we just want to thank you all for coming. We're going to close this recording and then we'll start another recording. So Sally, before we start, so if you have questions, you can start